Hi, I'm IKEA, and for no particular reason, I want to talk about comparing builds and how we do that and how we don't, specifically as well. We're going to use an example out in the wild as we ran into it a few days ago. And having watched this thing, which I'm going to bring up right now, by a certain Anytime Gaming, it was horrendous, and it is basically a masterclass in how you don't compare builds. So we're going to use them as an example to show why you don't compare builds the way that they do, and then also show how we do compare builds. And use that as a springboard to kind of discuss all that. And yeah, we're going to go into a spreadsheet that I've prepared. All of this will be linked down below, of course, together with their video. You can also go watch theirs first if you want to and come in here prepared a little. But we're going to go through snippets of their video discussing what they did right, which is basically nothing, what they did wrong, which is a lot, and then also follow that up as we scroll down here in how to actually compare the correct builds in the correct way against each other, because they made more mistakes than just taking a bad method. On top of that, they did their own method wrong, which is impressive. One thing I want to say here as well is that while I am not fan of this person, no love will be lost in this discussion, because they are, to me, just one of the other clickbaiters, as clickbait after clickbait after clickbait title. I don't care for this person, but I care less for anybody that will go out of their way to lessen this person's life in any way by harassing them, by doing anything dumb. That is dumber than this person. Don't be that person. Don't be that guy. Don't be that gal. Just leave them alone. Enjoy this video as it is. We're going to take a humorous take, of course, on it. I'm going to yell a little bit because I haven't done that in a while, and I'm looking forward to it even. And we're just going to discuss why you shouldn't do it their way, but leave them alone for the rest of it. Yeah, let's jump in. As we'll start with their thumbnail and their title. As this is them going, "You are using Striker wrong," and they have, they have kind of blurred them, of course, because you have to clickbait, except you don't really. Coyotes on the left, crossed with a red cross on it, and with a green check mark, Eagle's Grasp. That's going to be the premise of this person, that Eagle's Grasp is better than using Coyote. That should be silly to anybody that actually understands things. But they're also not just going to say, they are going to use the word better. Actually, they're going to use the word upgrade. They're going to use the word better. They are going to say it is more total damage. And that is the cause of this. If you want to use Eagle's Grasp, that is perfectly fine. It is, as it came in with this season, it has actually found its way into a lot of builds that I enjoy, replacing a lot of contractors quite often, especially in, like, for instance, a high-end glass or a high-end Regulus build. Actually, the Eagle's Grasp fits in really well and just replaces the contractors outright and gives you a usable brand bonus on those where I'm not using an LMG, and then you're just giving up the damage to armor for a little bit more weapon handling, which is a fine thing to do, especially on high end, which, like, sometimes, well, on the glass high end, you don't have much weapon handling. On the Headhunter high end, of course, you do have a lot. If they had couched this in as a discussion of, like, hey, this is something I like to run. Hey, this is, here's an idea. No, they will outright say this is more total damage. They will say that this is better, as of course as well. the title of it is "The Striker is better than your Striker." It's not. And also, of course, the main headline of it of "You are using Striker wrong." My rebuttal to this person is they are using calculating damage wrong. They're not doing the math wrong. Their math actually does check out, but it's as quite often people use the phrasing of math doesn't lie. No, but it can be used to lie. If you do math in certain ways, you can try to obfuscate it. You can try to go for data that supports your theory, your conjecture over other people's. And that's why I'm also going to go and peer review this person. That is basically what the premise on my end is for this video, is that I'm going to look at what they're doing, go, is this okay? Is this not? I, of course, am not the be-all, end-all authority in this, but I kind of feel I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to just, outside of me, I'm just going to make points that are strong enough to stand by themselves, and that's actually what matters more so than the person themselves. We'll let them give the intro here for themselves, and then we'll go into their methodology.
All right, yay, another striker build. Let's go. I mean, I wouldn't say this is actually a build video. It's more like a comparison video. People like when I do comparisons, so that's what I'm doing. But this is actually a bit different. Instead of comparing any weapons or like gears, I'm actually comparing striker with striker, because I think there is a better way to play striker, or should I say an upgrade that I want to show you and compare as well with what usually people run around nowadays, right? So let me just show you first.
And yeah, he, of course, then goes into this video. We're going to take snippets from here on out. The full video will be linked down below, and you can go watch it if you want to. And so yeah, let's jump into his first build. And what we, of course, saw in their video is that they're going to the range. We're not going to let them speak. You can, of course, go watch the video and see that I'm not taking anything out of context here, but just to not make this extremely long, because, of course, we could be here forever. They show their build, the build that they're going to use. This is the first step that I know that this person does not know what they are talking about. We have a Grupo Coyote strikers, even in the comments when they get... somebody told them to use Ceska plus Coyote, they went, I have enough crit damage already, or I have enough crit chance already. You don't. You never do. This has been settled. I'll link to that video as well here if you're interested and didn't know this yet. As this is a somewhat older spreadsheet. Let's zoom in a little bit just so it's easier to read here. This is from a video called Ceska versus Grupo, outlining this exact thing. You should use Ceska. So this is Ceska plus Coyote versus Grupo plus Coyote. In Coyotes 0 to 15, in Coyote, Coyotes 0 to 15 down here, 15 to 25 up here. And of course, with Grupo, you can land on 48 with 1 crit chance mod, or 54 with 2 crit chance mods. The simple answer here is we're comparing within each segment to the Ceska. The Ceska is the 100% mark, and these other ones on burst and sustain being lower should tell you all you need to know. Grupo 54, Grupo 48, both are lower. In both cases, in both Coyotes, one of them, of course, the 48 will be closer when it's the mid-range buff up here, and the other one at 54 will be closer when you're at the short-range buff at 54. Neither at any point surpass Ceska. This is a settled debate. Like this is at this point just a kind of red flag waiting to happen. It's Ceska Coyote. Never, I mean, not never use. Why would you give up this damage? If you have an answer for that, just because I want 2% more challenge, is not a true answer to me. If you want the challenge, go make a purple build, run bad builds or something. We, of course, went into joke builds. Make one of those, make a purple build, make an all 511 build, make an all Rector and Kaiser build or something like that. This is not the answer to that. All you're doing is just being a worse build. And the thing is, if you want to run it, that is fine. The second that you recommend it to others, you're telling them to waste their time. Because if they're going out, what does it matter if they're farming for Ceska or if they're farming for Grupo? That will not make any difference to them, and you're giving them the worst of two options. Now, having ranted about that, and yet, if you are more interested in more in-depth of that, the Ceska versus Grupo video will be linked down below, and you can go watch that in its entirety. Let's go back. So yeah, they don't know what they're talking about already by presenting a Grupo Coyote with Elmo. I should say, of course, this is for Elmo. With Oreo, you can use Grupo. This is just for ARs, basically. No AR will will match up to a Ceska Coyote version. Especially other ARs as well, as Elmo, of course, is the highest crit chance. Let's continue on, though. What they are going to do is show us all their build, of course, with all of their stats and stuff. Keep this in mind that they do this for this, as they go piece by piece. I want to actually go back a tiny bit. One thing I'm already pissed off at here is they're 5.4K. There are decent SHT level, of course. Not that SHT level means something, but it does mean that you have some resources at the very least. Why aren't they putting a 12 crit damage mod into this Coyote? Especially in a second, keep this in mind, because that is an 11.4 crit damage mod. In later testing with the other builds that he's trying to promote, of course, what does he do? The obvious answer. We'll see it there. In the business, we call this foreshadowing, except this is not foreshadowing. This is more just with a spotlight. Just, yeah. So keep this in mind. This is 11.4 on this Coyote mask. We see them then going through every piece, showing every stat, and then again, not a full crit chance mod, except this Grupo chest. For this one, it doesn't matter. This Grupo chest will stay on his chest the whole time for the builds we're going to discuss here. So it doesn't matter. It's the same for all of them. With the Coyote, of course, is going to replace it with other things. And everything else is optimized. All of the pieces, he's running all crit damage all around. With the exception of that crit chance on his chest, landing him on this awkward 47.8. Generally, of course, you can go for this 48. Generally, I would recommend the 54, honestly, over the 48. The 48 is better at mid-range and long range. The 54 is better at short range and mid-range of the Coyote. So generally, I prefer having it be better into the 0 to 15 and the 15 to 25 instead of the 15 to 25 and the 25 plus. Because sometimes you are in close range and then this 48 becomes an issue. The crit damage is also, of course, awkward because that 11.4, so they're landing on a 175.4. But yeah, as they go on, they then explain a little more, and then they start shooting the range. At this point, I'm expecting, they're just gonna use the range DPS, and it's a dumb thing to do, but it's fine. Especially if you're doing such a short test. One thing you can use this for if you want to compare, because for some people, they will never reach the point of just filling out a spreadsheet or something. It's kind of fine as long as you do every build in the same way. If you find a consistent way that kind of works, so you could, for instance, in my first year of division, we would kind of shoot a target for like a minute and then do that several times. You're gonna get somewhat of a consistent number out of it, and it being somewhat consistent should already tell you that it's really still not a good way of comparing builds, but that's still okay. But no, what they're going to do is, and we'll let them talk through it themselves.
You have and your stats, so keep that in mind.
Yeah,
so let's see how much damage you do. We're actually going to ignore the health damage there. It's obviously more than 1 million there, but we're going to ignore that because a soul rifle gives you, health damage boost. But we're going to see how much damage you do on the armor, because most of the enemies we fight has armor on them, right? So let's see the highest.
That's not true at all.
There. So that's 865, 198. That's the.
Okay, so they're singling out the crit damage there, leaving out the non-crit damage shot. They're going for DTA only because they state that we fight more enemies with armor than with health on them, which is debatable, kind of depends. We have heavies and stuff, and you could take either number because he's going to stick with the AR anyway. But yeah, so he's going to take that number.
As the highest damage, right? 865, 198. So as you can see on the chat as well, 865, 198. Now, how are we gonna get an overall DPS here? So
an overall DPS, that is the term that he used there. I want to single that out because, of course, a DPS is a set thing. It is a damage per second. There is a set ways of calculating them both in burst and in sustain. Let's see what he does.
What we're going to do basically is multiply that damage by 70, which is the Sentinel's Engine's mag. I know that might sound a bit weird and... No, my friend. That doesn't sound a little bit weird. So what he said there is he's going to take the crit damage shot, not both shots, and take an average shot of them, which is what you would normally do. You would take the crit damage shot, multiply it by the percentage of crit. You would take the non-crit shot, multiply that by the inverse of the crit chance number,
the percentage that you're not going to crit. And as a percentage there, you get an average shot number. That is the basis of basically all calculations whenever there is a chance involved. You kind of need to average it out to an average shot number, which most of us do. And that is the basis that you take into the rest of it to do burst and sustained damage calculations with a crit chance. It isn't a little bit weird to take a crit damage shot just by itself and times that by the magazine size. That is not DPS. That is, at the very least, closer to damage per mag, which isn't a DPS. It is a damage per mag. It is not a per second. It is a per mag. And that is also not how you do damage per mag, because in damage per mag, you would also take, again, average shot, averaging out the crit chance out, times the magazine size, getting a number out. That would be damage per mag. What this is just as if you're 100% crit chance on the crit damage times the mag size, which is not a factor at all that you can use. Damage per mag as well would not be a comparison point between builds. This is like saying, I went into a car shop and I went looking for what had the biggest gas tank. Is that really the thing that you're going to base your decision on? What has the most mileage? What has the biggest gas tank? No. It is a factor to consider. There is a reason why on my burst and sustain DPS weapon tables, there is also damage per mag. It is an important factor, but it's not the factor we base everything on. This isn't a little bit weird, okay? Let's actually see them do this.
You're not going to be critting on every single bullet. I know that. But to make it easy for the test.
But to make it easy for the test, my friend, you're making a video trying to educate people. This isn't as well the only fault we'll see in this video, because he's going to make more errors. And on those, I'm not actually sure that it's ignorance. Although I will still stay with the thinking of do not attribute to malice, that which we can adequately explain with incompetence. But neither malice nor incompetence is a good look. And yeah, he goes, of course, he knows you don't always crit, but he wants an easy test. He's already made this test much harder, because we're going to see in a second, of course, you could just fill out any of a dozen tools that can give you a burst or the sustained DPS number, and where you can compare builds actually.
I think we're going to do that, and I will explain it later on in the video. Don't worry about it. But for now, let's just
I will worry about it.
So if I do that, how much damage that actually is? Well, that's actually 60,600,000.
So yeah, so he's going to go into his numbers. And that is build 1. Now, of course, I've already collated all of his data together. We have the matching numbers that he has for 3 builds that he's going to do. In this first one already, of course, he's using whatever his stupidity is here to get a certain number, which we're matching here, compared to the actual damage per mag, where we take what I said before. We take a crit shot, times it by the crit value that he has, the non-crit shot times by the inverse of the crit value, basically the non-crit value, and you can get an average shot out. This is a very simple and easy calculation to do. Hell, I've done this on on napkins with a calculator next to me. It's not hard. Just take this instead. And that is before, of course, we go into deeper of this, because we're going to actually compare the builds that he's talking about. But first, let's let him continue digging his own grave. So now we've seen how he's going to compare the builds, which is a very bad way. So I wouldn't recommend comparing builds on this, because also he's going to go now into creating issues for himself. With as he's in total going to compare 3 builds. I'll already spoil what they are. So it's the I was going to say Ceska plus Coyote, just because I'm so used to saying that. It isn't, of course. It's a Grupo plus Coyote, the bad version. He's going to go into Grupo plus Fox's Prayer, and then Grupo plus the Eagle's Grasp. Both of those should be with Ceska, of course. Later on, when we actually compare them, we're going to use Ceska, because might as well get something useful out of this. So he's going to go into his second build. He's going to replace the coyote. And we'll actually watch him do that with his audio on.
A little bit. So there is another variant that a lot of people like.
So you might have noticed earlier on, so this is the point where I'm not sure if this is malice or incompetence. Earlier on, he showed us every piece. Every single piece got a moment in the spotlight showing its stats. He's swapping from that coyote. Again, remember, with the 11.4 crit damage mod. He's swapping here to a striker mask. Now, this could, of course, be in the heat of the moment. He's doing this as a one-cut. It is just one continuous thing because, as he states, he wants to keep it fair. But then, if you want to keep it fair, you should show what stats are on this. Because I do know, of course, what stats are on this, just because I back-calculated it out loud. So
that is the coyote.
He didn't show it.
Not coyote, sorry.
And of course, on the Fox's Prayer, he does show it. Not intentionally, maybe even. But yeah, it is a crit damage there. So you're losing a crit chance if the mask is double crit damage. Of course, the right way to even if you wanted to keep it as kind of in this calculation, in this comparison mode with the way you're calculating it, if you kept the crit chance at least the same, it's not as bad. But he didn't show the mask. If the mask had a crit chance mod in it or a crit chance stat, that would of course equalize for the loss of the coyote, where you have a crit chance crit damage, going to this Fox's Prayer. I'll tell you right now that mask is crit damage, crit damage. I know that for certain because he's going to hit these damage numbers up here. It might be a little bit tiny now. We'll zoom in much later. He's going to hit that middle numbers there, which are these numbers. And as you can kind of see, these numbers kind of match up to this number of 852.734 matches up here with this 852.733.4, which is within the margin of error for the floating point calculations as the game does it and does weird rounding at points. And the only way to get there is with a double crit damage mask, and not even just a double crit damage mask, but a double crit damage mask with a full 12-bit crit damage. So not even within his own testing is he consistent. Move that crit damage mod around. If you don't have an extra, just move that 12 crit damage from the mask to the coyote. Also, in doing that, you also kind of show what you're doing, which is a mistake, because he is now landing. He was already at 47.8, which I already pointed out that outside of maybe Countdown, where you have a ton of coyotes, I wouldn't run it that way, especially in a 4-man. I would much prefer having the 54, especially if you're solo with just that coyote. He is now at a 41.8. A maxed out would be a 42. He dropped 6 crit chance by doing what he did here. Now, of course, he's just going to compare on the crit damage. That stayed the same, of course. Oh, well, not the same, because you're losing the coyote buff, but you are over-reporting on your crit damage just because your crit chance isn't up to it anymore. And this is, of course, a horrendous way of balancing your crit chance, crit damage. As we see him going on, he equips the foxes. And then, of course, here, the other issue with the way that he's comparing is going to pop up. We see his numbers rolling by there. Let's find the spot where we actually see his full out numbers. Notice that the Fox's Prayer is affecting both the crit damage and the non-crit damage. That is, of course, core to this as well. That means that the Foxes, you need to be in average shot. Otherwise, you are not comparing apples to apples. You have to account that the base damage, the white damage, in this case blue against the armor, that isn't the non-crit shots, that went up with Fox's Prayer as well. On the other ones, it is in the 280 something range for the crits, for the non-crits. Here, of course, it's 288 on that one. On this one, it's 300 something. If we actually go to the spreadsheet, we can kind of see here that, yeah, the non-crit was 288k, now it's 308k. Even within his own method, this is a bad way of comparing things because you're only taking the crit. On top of that, you've just dropped 6 crit chance. even within its own method, this is a very dumb way of doing things. And that is within a bad method. There are way better methods, as we'll see in a little bit, as we'll fix up his mistakes. But this to me is the point where I'm not sure if it's malice or just incompetence. Putting in a crit damage Striker's Mask when you're taking out a crit chance, basically, by taking out the Coyotes, one crit chance that it will always have. This mask should have been with one crit chance. But that, of course, if he had done it this way, which we'll see in a little bit, he, of course, wouldn't have gotten the difference that he's going to get in a second. Because, of course, here he goes into the difference between the Fox's Prayer one and the Grupo Coyote version. And, of course, it is a little bit of a difference between there. And actually a massive one, kind of 3 million-ish in his 3.7 million-ish in his way. And that's, of course, because he's doing it poorly and he's not accounting for the parts that he's not accounting for, the non-crits. Then, of course, he goes into the Eagle's Grasp. He will keep that same Striker's Mask with the double 12s. And the reason I know there are double 12s is because, yeah, the only way to match up with it is for me to calculate it as double 12s. So we're, instead of this being a 175.4, if it was the same 11.4 crit mod, it is a 12 in there because it's a 176. Then he goes, of course, from the Fox's Prayer to the Eagle's Grasp, again with crit damage with that same mask. And of course, the thing that he will say,
weapon handling, which is good.
Yeah,
the Striker already gives us, 15% weapon handling. With the gloves, we get 30%. With your watch, you get 10 more percent, so that's 40. And if you're using Gunner, which I'm pretty sure most of you guys are, you get 10% more weapon handling for staying still. So that's 50% of weapon handling on a.
And he's forgetting about Elmo. He will forget about Elmo in all of this. I'm just going to cut to the short of it because, yeah, Elmo also has another 20. On Strikers with Elmo, this is already a dumb thing to do. Just Elmo by itself, as we'll show in a little bit, is so accurate on Strikers that's the whole point of running Elmos. You don't need this. This would be much more of a case for maybe Bighorn, maybe Eagle Bearer, maybe you want to use an Og or something just because you like them, but they suck kind of for weapon handling. But of course, the thing is, that's okay. It's okay to take weapon handling just to make it easier on yourself. I, for instance, quite often take Palisade for that extra 10% armor on kill, pairing that, for instance, with Gunner, 20% armor on kill on each kill. 5 kills get you back to full. I can totally see those kind of things. But I actually compared them correctly. Because what he's going to do now, of course, is the same test again with this, and we'll kind of let him take it a little bit for here.
That's why I'm sure that people who tried and didn't bother using it, they probably saw the crit numbers and saw it's low, so they just, thought that it's not good. Which is, obviously you can see here, it is actually low here. As you see, I'm critting for 794,922. That's the highest peak we're doing on the body when there is armor, right? So 794,922. That's the number we just saw here, right? Now the thing is, we have to multiply this number by 80 instead of 70, and that's what we're gonna do. And if we do that, the number we're gonna get is 63,593,760. So 63,593,760. That's the number we're gonna get that. So obviously this is way higher damage than.
I'm going to cut him off there because we're not taking him out of context. But that is obviously much more damage there. On a somewhat modified damage per mag. Not on burst, not on sustain. The things we actually compare builds on. On some asinine way of doing damage per mag. We'll actually do the damage per mag calculations and kind of see the difference. The thing is with this, you're losing damage. You're losing quite a bit of damage. That is okay. You can choose to lose damage. I sometimes do it as well. For instance, with this global event, Guardians, I'm using a Bullet King a lot. You give up a lot of damage, but not having to reload actually with this global event is kind of nice. If you have issues aiming, maybe for instance more with controller or something, I could totally see using the Eagle's Grasp That is not at issue here. The issue is he's calling it an upgrade. He's calling it, actually, I have it in my notes. He calls it better twice. He calls it an upgrade 3 times. And of course, here he says it is more damage. And later on even says it is more total damage. It's not. It just isn't. It is more damage per mag. But damage per mag, of course, now you have to put out 10 more rounds to get that same damage per mag. Damage per mag is just the damage that you have in your mag, not how fast you get it out, of course. Having to shoot 10 more rounds is basically another second that you have to fire to get, as we'll see in a second, basically the same damage. So now that we've seen him do his thing, let's actually go look at what he kind of did in a much better way in a spreadsheet. It's kind of why those things are handy. And then we'll see actually how to calculate these things. And of course, to combat this blatant misinformation this person is trying to put out there, I've prepared a spreadsheet. It will be linked down below, of course. You can go and read along at your own leisure and pace. We're going to zoom in here a little bit, of course, to get it a little bit bigger, just so we can see what's happening. He, of course, had 3 builds: the Grupo Coyote, the Grupo Fox, and the Grupo Eagle. All 3 of them also with Grupo, because why would you use Ceska, especially when you're even losing more crit chance? But I digress. So yeah, we have his numbers here. I just copied these from his video. Of course, as well, we're hitting the same numbers him here with his stupidity, his method of just taking crit damage, going by max size, getting a number out. Of course, we see that again and again and again. In here, we have then, because he just showed it to us, we can actually calculate his actual damage per mag, and actually also his burst DPS and his sustained DPS and everything else, because he shows us his crit damage and his non-crit damages at max stacks. He showed us his crit chance, crit damage, so we know those. That's all you need. With those 4 numbers, I can calculate at your average shot. From that, we can, if I know your weapon, we can go to burst and sustain DPS. And if you know your mag size by knowing your weapon as well, we can go to damage per mag. That's pretty easy. So here we're just taking his crit numbers before actually inputting it into any of my multi-calculators, which are down there. Just flat out taking his crit damage, combining it with his crit chance, critical hit chance, together with his non-crits, with the inverse of critical hit chance, basically. So it's basically 100 minus whatever that number is as the crit chance. You get an inverse. And of course, what you get an average shot out of that. Basically what you're doing, because you're timesing this by this as a percentage, timesing the other one by this with a percentage, you're getting an average shot out. This is basically a combination to quite easily get one number, because you kind of need one number to put into burst and sustain DPS calculations. Otherwise, you have to do your burst and sustain, or your bursts of crits and non-crits separately, but you can just average them out together because there's a chance. Of course, this will not hit the same way, of course, every single time within the game, but it doesn't need to. We're averaging out. We're hitting high enough crit chance numbers. This isn't the game where we're like critting for like 3, 4, 5%, like Fallouts or some RPGs like that, where we have a really low crit chance, so you can't really rely on. Generally, if your build is set up correctly, you're likely hitting the crit chance cap, and you're critting more than not. You're critting 6 out of 10 shots. So we can definitely use it this way. Now, his actual damage per mag for that first build is 39 million. Then we see it with the Fox, and with the Fox, of course, becomes that issue of him, first of all, messing up his crit chance, crit damage by keeping that mask double crit damage, because, of course, the way that he's doing it, that will prefer what his outcome will be. And yeah, I'm not sure if that is just ignorance or malice. Maybe he can weigh in on it himself. But because our here, of course, with the other 2 builds, with the Eagle and with the Grupo, the non-crit damage is going to be the same, because they, of course, are basically the same going to be. The Fox, of course, is going to affect that non-crit damage. So this is going up. That means that in the end, the difference that he shows of it being a lot, with going from, being kind of next to each other because of that crit chance loss here, because to him, these are his numbers. So this 60 and this 59 million, they're a lot closer than the numbers I'm putting out here. And that's because he messed up his crit chance. you shouldn't balance your crit chance, crit damage this way. Of course, as well, in this other one, he had the Coyote, although the Coyote was at 5 meters, so it was at the close range, so he wasn't getting any crit chance out of it. In this one, there is not even a Coyote to be had on his build. He could, of course, get it from somebody else, but then still, he would be at 51 crit chance with just the mid-range buff, unless he has the long-range buff, which you can't really rely on consistently, and from others as well, again. And then, of course, we have his Eagle version. And, of course, the Eagle is going to affect the mag size. His mag size is going from 70 to 80, meaning that, yeah, you are getting a little bit more damage per mag because your mag size goes up, but do you really, actually? If you do it right as well. So here again, we have his numbers. So on mine, you can see already the difference is a little bit smaller than his. If we compare this, the actual damage per mag measured out of a average shot, we see that this is 39.4, this is 39.9, and of course his was 60 and 63 million. His difference was 5%. My difference is 1.31%. It's almost as if you actually, and this is between the Eagle's Grasp damage per mag increase over the Grupo. Of course, you would still say, oh, but the damage per mag goes up. So, it could be better. The thing is that we have a thing called firing time. That is the time that it takes you to unload a weapon. And because of that, actually, as I hovered over that link, we have 16.3 rounds per second on the Elmo. Basically, it's RPM divided by 60, getting us an RPS, rounds per second. So on these two builds, with the Fox and with the Coyote, we are unloading in 4.29 seconds, so 4.3 seconds. With his version, of course, we have 10 more rounds to put out, meaning that we need 4.9 seconds. We need 0.6 seconds more, so 2/3 of a second more, basically. On 5 seconds, on basically 4 and a little bit seconds, that is quite the increase. And of course, this damage per mag comes at a cost somewhere else, which is burst and sustain numbers. Let's actually compare these builds on burst and sustain and see kind of what the outcome becomes. So here we're actually gonna do what I would hope somebody comparing builds would do. And that is actually to compare them on their burst and sustain DPS, even though we're also in a little bit going to go and compare them on their actual damage per mags, which I generally don't have, for instance, in this multi-calculator, just because I ran out of space, basically. And also, the damage per mag is not hard to just quantify because, yeah, it is just literally the average shot number times the mag size. But if we actually take his builds, and again, this is that Grupo Coyote that he had, then Grupo Fox, and then the Grupo Eel Bearer, and especially compare them on their percentages versus each other. So this is all comparing versus that build in the top slot, which is that Grupo Coyote, on their burst and their sustains. First of all, we have these checking numbers on the side, and that's actually what I've used, of course, as we talked about a little bit earlier, to kind of see that these checking numbers kind of match up there. This one matches there, this one kind of matches here. Of course, within rounding errors, because we'll be off generally by like one, at most two digits, or well, a digit, basically, the end digit. And that's fine, because we're getting close enough. That's also how I know that one mod was maxed out, because the only really way to get there is to kind of use a maxed mod on that striker mask that he put in, instead of the not maxed out mod that he had in the Coyote. That's also why we have here at the end some corrected stuff, because that's actually going to be much more interesting. But first, we'll see the way that he had set up the builds. Now, of course, as expected, going from a Coyote, especially a close-range Coyote set up at 48 crit chance, or well, 47.8, because he could not be bothered to put in the 6 crit chance in there. That's going to be much higher than a Fox, especially a Fox that is at 41.8 crit chance and isn't receiving a Coyote buff from somewhere else or from itself. That's going to lose you a lot, of course. The thing to do there is, at the very least, the very least, match up the crit chances. He did not do this. That is the part where I think there is maybe some malice in play, or just basically just neglectful incompetence. Because yeah, if you don't line up your crit chance, crit damages right, you have 176 crit damage. Really think that 42 crit chance is going to be enough for that, is when you can cap at 60? Because the right thing to do is actually cap at 60, not even take it to add in one crit chance mod. You would likely be better off inputting multiple crit chance mods, which we'll see a little bit later on when we actually do the comparison right, a little bit later down there. But for now, so he flipped this crit chance, basically losing it, but keeping his crit damage high, of course. Because of that, his actual bursts are much, much lower than they could be, actually. Because if you actually balance his crit chance and crit damage, you would actually get better numbers. This is 101 of build making, how to balance your crit chance, crit damage. And also to use this as a teaching moment, then if you don't know how to do that, you literally take your crit chance times your crit damage and bigger number wins. If you have, and it doesn't really matter the way that you do it, which one is as a percentage or dividing by thing. No, just take the numbers as they are. So literally you could take 176 times 41.8 and then 176 and then basically the other option that you would have. So this would be minus 12 plus 6. You would then land on actually this number, 164, 47.8. Multiply those together, and whichever one is the bigger number between those wins. That is the basis of just balancing out your crit chance, crit damage. And the answer, and a short answer to this as well, is basically whenever you're above 120, you just need to hit the cap. Like, just hit the cap at 60, maybe even wasting a few, but then for that you need deeper calculations to kind of see if it's worth wasting, maybe going to 62 instead of 60. But just balance them out. This isn't the balanced crit chance, crit damage, because he's at 176.42 if the mod was max. It's not even max, it's 41.8. This is insane to me, to even recommend the build like this. And then, of course, compare them, not on their burst and sustains, because they suck, especially that Zvia, the Eagle Bear, or the Eagle's Grasp, Grupo, is 11% behind on burst. It is not even really keeping up in its sustain, even though it is helping both the reload speed with its weapon handling, of course, and also has a bigger max size. It's not even keeping it up on sustain. Now, of course, you could make the case, I'm getting 15 weapon handling, but that's, of course, not the case, again, that he's making. He's saying this is better. This is better? This is better? I have no words for that. But then, of course, one thing we could do is try to at least fix up his mistakes a little bit. What if we actually put a full mod, as these three numbers are, for build 1, build 2, and build 3 here? What if you first off put a full maxed out mod in that Coyote, at least making that part match up between the builds? You could have just swapped that mod around, but you chose not to. It doesn't make too big of a difference. It's a 0.15% increase, but you should have done this. How are you going to compare them on crit damage when you put a lower mod into the Coyote? And the worst thing of it is, a few people kind of pointed out in his thing that, of course, the crit chance changed and stuff, but not as much as should have. It has 20k views. It should have like 10k comments of what you're doing is wrong. Sadly, of course, not everybody is aware, and there is, of course, an overwhelming amount of well done, good job, and thanks for this information and stuff like this. Now, if we fix this crit chance, crit damage of it, basically flipping one crit chance here over, so at least the crit chances line up. This should be the minimum you do for this test, correcting that crit chance to be the same across all three builds. Because if you're only comparing the crit damage, at least your crit chance has to be the same for all three builds. Otherwise, it is not equivalent exchange between those two. You're comparing on the crit damage and you're losing crit chance. But then what we see is actually the numbers go up. So that Fox's prayer, instead of that being 95.1% of it, is actually 97 now. Hell, even the Eagle's Grasp is going above 90% now. If you just fix this up, and this isn't even completely fixed up, because we could go higher than this, of course. We could put more crit chance into this, because you also would need to. The other build has Coyote from itself. Are you expecting a Coyote from somebody else? Then you could even, instead of that Coyote, run Grupo for yourself. Run Ceska Grupo, or in this case, hell, even if you don't want that, run a Fenris. Run Fenris Grupo if you're that dumb that you don't understand it. Ceska is the way to go. You could have made an equivalent test between the two. You chose not to and left out this crit chance. This is malice? Question mark? Or were you literally this ignorant? That is the question at the core of this, and why I felt I needed to make this video. Now, as well, if we actually take his corrected crit chance, because we're getting some damage numbers here out, of course, which we can use to, in his method, again, do this calculation of what if you actually put a crit chance in there. And then what we see actually is if we take, so this is the same, of course, although actually a little bit higher, because we're taking the numbers from having the full mod. So the whatever the hell his thing was is now a little bit higher here, of course. But what we then see is actually if you correct for the Zvia, because he was, of course, only comparing on the crit damage, if you're not just comparing on the crit damage, or just at least keeping the crit chances the same now, he, of course, has lost some crit damage. There is no longer a difference there. This is the percentage difference between this number for the Grupo Coyote and the damage, his crit damage per mag, whatever the hell it is, for that same build, but actually corrected for that crit chance. There is no difference. And of course, this build again needs to fire for 10 more rounds to actually get this damage per mag out. This build gets it out 10 rounds faster on that damage per mag. It should be obvious that it is actually much more powerful. And this is also, of course, the other thing where I'm like, is this malice or is this incompetence? This is, of course, the only metric, damage per mag, although actually even like in the way that he's done it, in the bad way that he's done it with having that stupid little crit damage way of doing this, where it is even better in. Has he cherry-picked that? Or does he compare always like this? I haven't much of his videos. In a lot of his videos, he doesn't actually talk about numbers. I watched a few of his build videos. I haven't seen any other comparison video of his. So I'm actually kind of curious if he always does this, or did he cherry pick this for this? This is the second malice or incompetence. And yeah, this is if he had done it actually in the correct way, there would basically be no difference there. And of course, that would not make a good video for him. But luckily, he made it for a good video for me. Let's actually go compare these builds in the actual way that you should do it with Ceska Coyotes versus Ceska Fox and Ceska Eagles Bear. Actually, let's see what the difference is and actually make an educated decision. And to actually compare them, we're going to use, again, one of these multi-calculators. This will also be linked down below, this tool, so you can go get it and use it for yourself. It is a Google spreadsheet that you can need to copy to your own Google Drive, and then you can fill them in. And these are multi-calculators of my design. We're kind of comparing up to 10 builds here, as I didn't explain earlier, but we're mostly concerning ourselves with this burst DPS and the sustained DPS percentages. One thing I should actually explain is why do we use burst and sustain damage over using, for instance, a metric like we have down in the corner here as well with this one, damage per mag, or, you know, what he was trying to kind of do, but failing miserably in trying to do a somewhat like crit damage per mag. The reason we compare on burst and sustain DPS, this is the theoretical upper band, burst being the theoretical upper bound of your damage, and sustain is your theoretical lower bound of the damage. Basically the higher and lowest point that you're theoretically going to hit, as long as you're completely firing at full rates of whatever put in, like for instance here armor, which of course will not happen, hitting every shot and such. The reason, though, this is in the same way as kind of, if you are familiar with cars, you could kind of compare burst DPS to horsepower. You can kind of compare sustained DPS with torque. And you could kind of compare damage per mag with either like the mileage of it, although sustain kind of fits that as well. But you can kind of see it as it's how big its gas tank is, as we were kind of talking about earlier, or for instance, maybe what the range is on an EV. Still an important metric, but generally not the metric we compare builds on. We do this on burst and sustain because, especially when there is no real difference between how the build will play. So, for instance, if you're comparing, for instance, strikers versus negotiators, they play completely differently, of course. So when you have that, you can't just go by burst and sustain numbers. But if you want to just compare between several versions of negotiator in itself to see which one is more burst and more sustain, more higher bound, more lower bound, you use burst and sustain DPS. This is the classic tool for comparing, especially in a setting like this where we're kind of comparing strikers within itself. So all three of these kind of play the same, of course. And basically here, bigger number wins, at least on damage. You could, of course, have other things. You could have maybe on the chest have something else. For instance, braced, or having trauma or something else. Those would still play differently. This is, all three are obliterate strikers. They kind of play the same exactly, with having a little bit more weapon handling, of course, on the Eagle's Grasp one. But they don't meaningfully play different. So we can't just, this is the best tool then to compare those builds. So let's take that information and actually apply it to the better versions as well of these builds. Ceska. Ceska should be in there, as we talked about earlier. Again, video link down below and the spreadsheet of that video as well. If you want to go see the differences of them, but on ARs, so not on SMGs or such, on ARs, there should be no debate. That debate is already settled. Ceska wins against Grupo. So yeah, it should be Ceska Coyote, Ceska Fox, Ceska Eagle. If you're going that route, you should at least do it this way, because as well, and that helps all of the builds out, as their damages are actually just higher on doing it this way. Then we have, with the Coyote, of course, a 0 to 15 and a 15 to 25, because we have different ranges that we can use for that. On the Foxes, we still also have two of them. One of them being a Fox's Prayer, kind of in the same way that he had with, or well, the way that he should have had it, with one crit chance mod, getting it to this 46, or actually fixing up its crit chance to take it all the way to 58 here and dropping a lot of crit damage. Of course, he wouldn't want this, because then the crit damage numbers here become much lower in the version that he was using it, going really low. But of course, when you actually want to compare them on their burst and sustained DPS, this is the way to set up the builds. And this is also the way we set up the builds, with balancing out their crit chance, crit damage. And what we see then is, as we compare here with this 100% being on the Coyote 0 to 15, which isn't the better version of it, because actually in 15 to 25, it does outperform, of course, the 0 to 15 version, because it is much more set up to, it is on 52 crit chance base. And of course, with the mid-range, we're getting 10 plus 10 on the crit chance and crit damage. And that is a much better result for that build, instead of just another 25 crit damage on that first one. But what we see for all of the other ones, especially the Foxes here, they're just lower. Because, yeah, of course, Ceska Fox is not going to beat Ceska Coyote. A case could be made versus Ceska Grupo, but not against Ceska Coyote. there's a reason Ceska Coyote is the go-to. Fox's Prayer is just going to lose out. And keep in mind as well, this is at full uptime for damage to targets out of cover, which also just does not happen. Even if you want to take it really high, as a 95% or something, which we generally do, for instance, for things like Incursion or something, still things go into cover. You can't avoid that. You will have to need to put a few shots here and there into enemies into cover, and that adds up pretty quickly and drops it to around 95%, for general play even 90%, especially if you're, for instance, solo against multiple enemies, which you would have in like a public execution or in lands, in control points. And all of those things, you have so many enemies that some will make it to cover. And then even if you're staggering them out of it, you don't have 100% uptime. So this number is even a little bit skewed because of that. We'll actually adjust for that in a second comparison, in a second below. Also as well, here we're keeping it at a no headshot rate and of course full DTA, kind of the same the way that he had it. We are actually going to play with this headshot rate, of course, because that will affect actually the builds with more crit damage, and the Fox will actually kind of catch up, as we'll see there in a second. But then we have the Eagles version. We have that 80 round mag, of course, a little bit better reload. That actually keep up its sustain. So its lower bound is not too far behind. Its upper bound on burst is laughably low, of course, in comparison. To say that this is better or an upgrade or more damage or more total damage, as he called it in that video, is a straight up lie. There is no way around that. It's either incompetence or malice. You can, of course, choose to do this. And hell, you can even make a video on it, and I likely even will at some point. For instance, I use the Eels grasp now quite often in, for instance, what used to be old glass reds, especially for ARs and stuff. It's a perfectly fine fit, especially as a replacement for the contractors. You gain enough of it, especially on a build that doesn't have much weapon handling, where strikers with Elmo is kind of course, has a lot of weapon handling. There, for instance, I totally can see it, but then I don't go, it's more damage. I know I'm losing damage. You should know that you're losing damage. This should be brought like this. I don't know why he's trying to be, or so many as well, Division YouTubers, are trying to be used car salesmen. This is the best, that is the best, as if they're getting commission per Eagles grass sold. Like, just, no, you're losing damage. You can choose to do so for the weapon handling. This mag size does not really matter, because we'll actually scroll a little bit to the right. Well, first I should know, so if we don't put our crit chance crit damages, and this is the reason again why to fix up your crit chance crit damages, because this is that 46 is kind of in the same style that he had it, of course, with it being extremely low, although of course we're taking it still a little bit higher. You gain basically 4% on each of these builds by actually fixing up your crit chance crit damage, because that matters. There is a reason we say that it's important to balance out your crit chance crit damage, because you can just gain 4%, basically 3.8%. Why wouldn't you? And the only reason to not do it is because you don't know. That's the actual answer only. Here as well, we have the same thing of damage per mag comparing. We are comparing to that top number, which is actually the Ceska Coyote at 0 to 15. But actually, if we, because then it kind of seems as if, of course, the Zwia here, the Eagles Grasp here, because of the Zwia brand bonus of 50 mag size, is actually winning at being, 104%. But actually, what if we compare this 41 million, as I haven't done that here already, but we're going to divide this 41 million by this 41 million from Coyote at 1 to 15, and it's a 0.1% difference, as we already see there. It's a 1.5% difference there. And this is, of course, the damage per mag. This is taking 10 rounds more to basically do the same damage. Damage per mag this is the reason we don't really care about damage per mag as much. We, of course, do care. One of the reasons, for instance, why the Vector 45 isn't as popular with people that actually are in the know as others is because one of that weapon is very much... the damage per mag is its worst attribute, kind of, compared to a lot of other weapons around it. And because of that, we tend to not choose it, because it doesn't matter as long as it's not too bad, basically. That's when damage per mag comes in. For the rest of the time, there is a reason we use burst and sustain DPS. But even then as well, if you didn't even want to use burst and sustain DPS, if you're one of these newfangled kids on the block that thinks time to kill is the way to go in a game like Division, which I fully disagree with, you can still go with time to kill. The metric that he was using is not just that he's using a bad metric, it's also he used his own metric poorly as well. Let's go to this final one to round it out for the numbers here, where we're comparing actually what if we're getting Coyote from somebody else, although as well here, the first one is actually from itself. Coyote 15 to 25 and getting it from somewhere else, because that's actually the point where you could, for instance, compare Fox versus Grupo, and you can land on this 52 for those builds and still hit 60, kind of helping them out. And then actually as well for the Eagle, you can kind of get a better comparison. So if we go with the Fox versus the Grupo here, it might seem that the Fox's prayer would win. This is with a 100% headshot rate. The DTA isn't active here, but it wouldn't matter. It would apply for all of them the same. Of course, the DTH, the inverse of it is damage to health, which is on the AR, but it would basically affect all of them the same. So it doesn't matter if this is on or off, but the damage to targets out of cover, of course, will affect the Fox's prayer more than the rest. So here at 100% headshot rate, which will affect the Grupo the most, because now it would seem actually that the Fox's prayer is kind of winning from the Grupo if you're getting your Coyote from somewhere else. So we have the Ceska Grupo, Ceska Fox. Now, if we actually put this headshot already at a much more reasonable 20% instead of 100% headshot, because you're just not going to for 100% headshot. 20% is much more reasonable. We already see that the Grupo is already winning. And this is before we actually put in the damage to targets out of cover rate down a little bit. Because even if we keep this at a really high 95%, the Fox's prayer does not win. This is the reason why my recommendation has always been, if you're slotting in a different piece, go with a Ceska Grupo. You can also go Ceska Fenris, but then the Fenris is only applying to your AR, of course. And from time to time, and it's a tiny difference between the two. It's usually less than 0.5% between them. And that really depends as well on grading, because actually if you have grading 26, it is actually still in the favor of Grupo. At grade 20, they're kind of the same. You could go Grupo Fenris or Ceska Fenris instead of Ceska Grupo. But the Grupo also applies to your ACS or secondary weapon if you were to use one. And that is important because generally nowadays as well, even for Obliterate Striker or something, I usually, actually I don't use ACSs that much anymore, but a secondary LMG has kind of been my go-to for the recent times, just because also extra damage or extra mag size basically from them, or well, basically extra ammo, just by having a secondary that I can also use at range. Because on Obliterate, we're perfectly fine just using the main weapon, the Elmo in this case. And this is the reason as well why we generally, the Fox does not actually win out unless you're actually calculating with full numbers here, which I just wouldn't recommend. At the end of the day, you kind of have to be realistic about the rates of headshots, the rate of detalk. Here we see as well, actually, if we don't have Coyote from somewhere else and we just want to have it go at it with just Ceska plus Fox or Ceska plus Grupo, and then actually land on 58. So we're not expecting a Coyote from somewhere else. So this comparison between these two kind of, we see actually that in that case as well, the Grupo kind of wins, especially at 58. So especially if you're putting more crit chance to get that Fox in. The Grupo even wins by a little bit of a larger margin between these two than it is between those two. Yeah, this brings us kind of to the end of this spreadsheet as we kind of saw how not to do it. And again, just his methodology is bad. And then he actually executed his methodology poorly. And I'm still not sure that him swapping in that striker chest or that striker mask as he did, with crit damage, where it should have been crit damage, crit chance, to keep the crit chance the same, especially if you're comparing on crit damage rolls or on crit damage hits. I'm really curious if this was malice or if this was incompetence, but likely, of course, I will never know. Let's go to one final thing as a thing to laugh at the end of this, as I ran into someone in the comments there, and I just want to share that, and then we'll lead into the conclusion. And yeah, before we head to the conclusion, I just wanted us to end on a humorous note. Under this video was a comment which I've highlighted here. It's actually not like that high. It's at the top because I have highlighted it because I'd responded to it. Let's actually make it a little bit bigger so we can kind of much more easily read this. I wish I could actually remove the recommendations on the side. That would maybe a good thing to figure out. But yeah, so we have this person. Don't harass them or anything, or if you see them out in the wall. They are a dumbass, the OP here. And we'll see why in a second. So the thing that they will say here, and we'll leave out kind of the discussion with other people, but we'll briefly go through it until I enter the discussion. But here is, I think you're trying to do accuracy build, which give more DPS because you miss less. I can get behind that. Although if you're doing more, less DPS because just you're giving up damage, you're also doing less DPS. This idea of accuracy just by itself being better, not particularly, because if you're giving up damage for it. But also here, just change your chest talent to braced, which gives you reload, accuracy, fire rate, etc. The thing that should be wrong there to anybody that kind of knows is that, well, two things are missing there, and one thing is wrong. If you don't know weapon handling, that you would get from braced, any weapon handling, the stat is accuracy, stability, weapon swap speed, which now again works, so we will include it together with reload speed. The reload speed does affect sustained DPS. The accuracy, stability can be nice to have. Weapon swap speed is somewhat meaningless outside of, sometimes it can actually be a little bit handy for getting to your specialization weapon, for instance, a little bit quicker. So this person comes in with how is this accuracy build? Is clear more total damage than a striker build out there. Just as myself, I'm watching this video. Yes, the Eagle's Grass makes it way better. I'll disagree, but he continues, of course. Got him as Grupo chest with brace. So again, not the Ceska, because why would you do it right? You have to understand what braced is and what it does. This person says when they earlier said it has fire rate, which is the wrong part of that. It does not have fire rate. It never has had fire rate. Fire rate is not part of weapon handling. I basically said that in 3 different ways, maybe. That would maybe help them understand if they would ever watch it. But of course, no, they are watching a much worse video. What does it do? It's weapon handling, it's stability, fire rate, reloading, accuracy, and distance. In this case, it turns out that what he means by distance later on we'll understand is just that you can have more effective range by just reaching out further. But of course, to most of the rest of us, distance would be optimal range, which it also does not affect, which gives you more DPS indirectly and keeps you at max stacks longer. Both of these things I would tentatively understand but not agree with. It doesn't get you to max DPS like the chest would, but it keeps you at 3/4 the way the whole fight just right, and you'll see. Like, if you're, yes, you're stacking likely more because you're doing so much less damage. So enemies are dying a lot more slowly, and you have more time to stack upon them. But yeah, here I enter, of course, with weapon handling is accuracy, stability, reload speed, and weapon damage and weapon swap speed. It is not rate of fire or optimal range. It only helps sustain DPS with its reload. It does not affect burst at all. This is why most people will not use braced, because they know what it actually does. And of course, here is the reason why I'm kind of tearing into this person, because they turned kind of into a meme for us. Listen, smart guy. If it's accuracy, it's stability and distance also. Again, using distance in not a conformist way in any way. But of course, so think before you talk, they say. And yes, it gives you a percentage of rate of fire. I've just I feel the trust me, bro, is kind of implied. Don't ever try to correct me again. So my original response, as we'll actually pull up here, although it'll go over me for a second, was actually something different than we see down there, because of course this person this video is from, they deleted it because maybe it was a little bit in poor taste. Let's actually make this bigger. And my response to him was, of course, listen, dumb guy. Distance implies optimal range, which it does not affect, and no, it gives no fire rate increase. A test that can be done by anyone in 2 seconds is to put weapon handling on a piece and see if the RPM of the weapon changes, which you have never have done, and even when called out, you still did not do. Stop trying to spread misinformation, and anyone should correct you when you spout incorrect stuff. How about you stop talking about things you do not understand? That was my initial response. This got deleted by the person, of course, that I'm kind of tearing into a second ago. So I'm going to guess that might not be I will be persona non grata pretty quickly over there anyway. Well, seeing as that one got deleted, I thought I would still leave a response here just for the benefit of others, because that's also I start here just for the benefit of others, seeing as the YouTuber here decided to delete my last comment, likely because of the personal insult that was a rework of your insult, but that was deemed okay for some reason apparently. Go test weapon handling on gear and see if your rate of fire changes. It does not. It is a very simple test, but this person has not taken the 2 seconds needed to test it. But they profess it they profess it proudly and incorrectly, and then sign off with "Don't ever try to correct me again." People like this should be corrected whenever they are wrong, and harshly, so they know what they have messed up, and publicly so others know as well. And then maybe they will think before they talk, as they advise others to do. And then, of course, this guy comes back with a, dude, I've been playing this build for 3 years. I've also been building loadouts for years for 4 clans. So I'm thinking you probably just bought this game 6 months ago, but stay strong even in the wrong. Now, of course, this person obviously does not know who I am. And not that I really am going to pull the "don't you know who I am" card, but also I would never just go, no argument that I ever make will be with "don't you know who I am," or like "I've been playing this build for 3 years," or "this game for," because if you want to play that game, I've been playing this game since beta. I've been here since basically day one. I played it quite a bit and really got into it a few months in. And I've been here for years upon years. And yes, I probably did buy this game 6 months ago. He's not wrong. For the 3rd time, for my 3rd account, which is now 2.5K. This person they've been playing with this build for 3 years, just professes that they have played the build for 3 years and not understood it, not seen that if you don't run braced, you don't have a difference in fire rate. This is an extra admission of guilt. Also, I've been building loadouts for years for clans. All you have been doing is misleading them. Initially here as well, of course, like even just the Coyote mask with a Grupo chest with braced. If you're even going to run braced, run it with a Ceska chest Coyote. This isn't up for debate, basically. Neither is rate of fire. They could have taken, instead of debating me here, they could have taken 5 seconds and actually gone and tested their thing. This is to say that as much as like we kind of tore into anytime gaming here, there are worse people. Also, here to point out, as people will go, oh, but they'll never get better, or why am I debating this person here or stuff like that. I'm not doing it for the benefit of them. There's plenty of people always lurking. There's plenty of people reading comments, reading Discord messages, reading Reddits. Uncorrected stuff left out there, kind of in the same way as flat Earth and 5G causing COVID stuff and such, should be contested. Not for the benefit of them, but for the benefit of others. In the same way why this video got made. I'm not in it to, per se, make fun of this person that we talked about. I'm very much more so in using them as a springboard to discuss how to compare builds and why we run Ceska Coyote and not Grupo Coyote to begin with. Why, if you do choose to, for instance, go Fox's Prayer, fix your crit chance, crit damage, actually comparing builds is much better if you actually use tools for it. And this is also the thing. If this was a discussion we were having in let's say, 2019 or such, that would be a different story. Nowadays, there are so many tools. We can literally go, for instance, here to the Division 2 builds tool, I always say it wrong, so let me make sure that I'm saying MSX Watt, github.io. With MX6 Watt, this build tool, you can just put in stuff, it'll spit out your burst and sustain DPSs. It'll even nowadays without time to kills. And there are many other tools like it as well. For instance, if I actually search here for likely, for instance, Scooby's build tool, as we quickly try to find it. This build tool, which you can copy from their spreadsheet, which over to your own Google Drive. A really good build tool which you can use. These tools exist. There is no reason to try to reinvent the wheel and then stumble and to make like a non-round wheel the way that that person did. So many tools exist nowadays. Go and use them. I will link, of course, the two that I talked about here now down below as well. Go use those. Don't try to do it in some weird way. And then, of course, I'm not even sure that they don't know about these because they, of course, stick to one metric. That at least the Zavia kind of competes on, which is the damage per mag. But even there, it is not a meaningful difference. So yeah, to conclude this video, I hope you enjoyed me tearing a new one into this person for no particular reason, as yeah, I'm bringing this series back where we kind of discuss shortcomings of others and try to correct it, because I don't want to just, burn and salt the earth. No, we're just gonna crop over it, plant over it in a better way. Now I hope that you understand why we compare with burst and sustained DPS and how to actually compare with burst and sustained DPS. And yeah, just use those. If you did find this informative or enjoyable in some way, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. And I hope you join me in future videos, which will actually likely be the third parter of the improving yourself next up. Although as well, I am doing some build overviews again, which are the shorts, as I've put out the Heartbreaker Tech Tank already, and actually following up this video in a few days will be the full healing FI build overview, which are just 1-minute shorts explaining how to put the builds together. So I know they are enjoyed by many, so I will try to get more of them out as well, putting some energy towards that. So I hope you join me for those, and as always, have a good night.